Are you ready for a reboot? Welcome to the Sheila Mack Show, reality at its finest. History reminds us those hit hardest often become the change makers. This year, we've all hit crazy economic, social, and emotional rock bottoms. We all get knocked down. Something hits globally, locally, personally. It affects our health, finances, our relationships. We have to recreate a business or career. Each show, Sheila and her special guest will be sharing their reboot stories, guiding you with real solutions to upgrade and up-level emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, and financially. Here on NBC's KCAA Radio. If you're ready to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and bra straps, enjoy a listen. Here's Sheila.
If you are just tuning in, this is the Sheila Mack Show on NBC's KCAA Radio, the station that leaves no listener behind. And I am your host, Sheila Mack. And today I'd like to thank our sponsors, MilitaryTrueCrimeAddict.com. And I want to share a little bit more about them and what they're doing. If you are searching for a podcast about crime related to actual life events of military personnel, veterans, family members, and associated with the military in any way, then you've come to the right place. We welcome you to the Military True Crime Addict, where we will be exploring a plethora of actual true crime stories that have not been reported on by news outlets or media. Stories that upon hearing, you'll be astounded by. Such history should have been told and reported on long ago. There will be detailed stories from so many of you that touch on topics such as assault, harassment, sexual preference, abuse of power, PTSD, murder, hazing, rape, and all stories that in some way relate to our military veterans and their extended families. On Military True Crime Addict podcast.com, we provide voice to the victims and hear their side of the story, raising awareness about the heinous crimes that have happened while fighting for those most impacted. You do not need to know anything about the military to enjoy this podcast. Here, our listeners can hear original true crime stories with precise dates and specifics about what actually occurred. You can follow at militarytruecrimeaddict.com or on Facebook. Go to the group titled Military True Crime Addict. If you are just tuning in to the Sheila Mack Show, If you are just tuning in, this is the Sheila Mack Show on NBC's KCAA Radio, the station that leaves no listener behind. And today, I would like to thank our sponsors for helping us to make this show possible. And our sponsor for today's show is MilitaryTrueCrimeAddict.com, and they are a fellow podcast. So if you are searching for a podcast about crime related to actual life events of military personnel, veterans, family members, and associated with the military in any way, then you've come to the right place. We welcome you to the Military True Crime Addict, where we will be exploring a plethora of actual true crime stories that have not been reported on by news outlets or media. Stories upon... Okay, let's try it again. If you are just tuning in, This is the Sheila Mack Show on NBC's KCAA Radio, the station that leaves no listener behind. I'm your host, Sheila Mack, and today I want to give a special thanks to our sponsor of today's show, MilitaryTrueCrimeAddict.com, and they are a fellow podcast, a very special podcast. So let me tell you a little bit more about what they do. If you are searching for a podcast about crime relating to actual life events of military personnel, veterans, family members, and associated with the military in any way, then you have come to the right place. Shit. Oh, lordy, lordy, lordy. Let's do it again. If you are just tuning in, this is the Sheila Mack Show on NBC's KCAA Radio, the station that leaves no listener behind. I'm your host, Sheila Mack, and today I'd like to give a special thanks to the sponsor of this show, which is a fellow podcast called Military True Crime Addict. And you can find them at MilitaryTrueCrimeAddict.com. I want to share a little bit more about what they do on their podcast. If you are searching for a podcast about crime related to actual life events of military personnel, veterans, family members, and associated with the military in any way, then you've gone to the right place. We welcome you to the Military True Crime Addict, where we will be exploring a plethora of actual true crime stories that have not been reported on by news outlets or media. Stories that upon hearing, you'll be astounded by. Such history should have been told and reported on long ago. There will be detailed stories from so many of you that touch on topics such as assault, harassment, sexual preference, abuse of power, PTSD, murder, hazing, rape, and all stories that in some way relate to our military, our veterans, and their extended families. Here, we provide voice to the victims and hear their side of the story and raise awareness of the heinous crimes to fight for those most impacted. And you do not need to know anything about the military to enjoy this podcast and increase awareness. Here, our listeners can hear original true crime stories with precise dates and the specifics of what occurred. You can follow at MilitaryTrueCrimeAddict.com or go to the Facebook group Military True Crime Addict. Welcome to the Sheila Mack Show, reality at its finest. Here we have real people sharing real stories and actionable steps to help you reinvent, rebuild, and reboot your business and personal life on your terms. I'm your host, Sheila Mack, and today we have special guest Scott Curtis. Scott is from Behind the Bits. It is a serious talk that he has about stand-up comedy. Every week, Scott Curtis talks serious with comedians about their craft. Okay, he talks about where they're inspired from, and the inspirations from Dave Chappelle, George Carlin, Paula Poundstone, and Liza. Is it Liza?
It's Iliza Shlesinger.
Iliza Shlesinger. See, now I'm learning how to pronounce these names. We're really having fun. So how do they write their comedy sets, and which jokes work, which ones failed, and how do you find your comedic voice? So he hits on topics every week that you and I can learn from for professional comedians, and also, I believe, just to bring some comedy to our business and personal life as well, which is so important, especially right now, this time in our planet. We need all the fun we can get. So welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you so much for having me, Sheila. I'm excited to be here.
And one of the things that my podcast and radio show is based on is my new best-selling book, Bootstraps and Bra Straps, the formula to go from rock bottom back into action in any situation. So I like to start off with, maybe if you could share with the audience a time in your business or personal life where you hit a tough situation and how you got back on track.
Well, I think my lowest point was after I've been married for 33 years and I've got 2 grown children. When they moved out, so they both went to college, and when they were completely out of the house and we were empty nesters, I took stock of myself and how I was, and I was not a person who I liked. So I suffer from some depression, and I tended to take that out on my wife a little bit and my coworkers and just everybody in life. So I kind of looked at myself and I said, you know what, if I stay this way, I'm probably going to end up alone. And I decided to start making some changes at that point and try to become a better person, try to have a little bit more humility, try to understand people and engage with people better. So that was really, I understood what my low point was, and by understanding it, I could look at myself from a distance and say, okay, this is what I like about myself and this is what I don't like about myself. And one of the things that was kind of a real eye-opener, first of all, I saved my marriage, so that's good. But the other thing was I needed something to fill my life that wasn't just being a husband, because the kids were gone. I was done with all that. They're good kids, raised them well, and I needed something to fill my time. And I actually, at that point, started a podcast. It wasn't the podcast I do now. It was a local podcast. It's called Michiana People, and I live close to the border of Michigan, so they call that Michiana. If you're in that area, that's Michiana. And I started interviewing people that were artists, musicians, business owners, entrepreneurs, and I was trying to learn from them what made them tick and try to take little pieces of that for myself. And in recording it, I put it out for everybody to hear. And as people listened, they loved it. So it was actually a very popular local podcast. And I learned so much from that I thought, okay, there's other stuff I can do. And that's when stand-up comedy came into play. And then the new podcast, which is Behind the Bits.
Wow. Now, how did comedy help you as far as with that depression you struggled with on and off? Did that make a difference?
As far as depression goes, it's always on. So it's just different degrees for me. And comedy really helps because it forces you to go out and be with people.
Yes.
And in my particular type of depression, I just like to stay in the house and not go anywhere. And actually getting out, scheduling yourself to go out and do things like that, it helped a lot.
That is so interesting. Now, for me, I don't struggle with depression as far as I know, but let me tell you, I did when we had our lockdowns. Now, I had lost my youngest son in December 2019. He was 22 and he had a heart condition since 5th grade, but we always hoped and thought he was okay. The doctors thought he was okay. And so I was kind of okay, giving myself a little bit for that. Like, yeah, I kind of felt down and there was a reason for that. That made sense. And then the pandemic hit, and I am a people person and so social. And so when I was stuck at home, I'm telling you, my house didn't even get cleaned much. I had to have clean people come over because I had no motivation. I was just like, I don't know. And it was subtle. It is a subtle, depression is a subtle thing. It just, you think you're okay. And then when you start getting out of it, sometimes is when you say, oh, whoa, wait a minute, that I really was kind of down.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of like that. So it's good to check in on your friends and loved ones and be aware, because we don't sometimes, I, at least for me, I did not realize how it had affected me until things started opening up, and I finally published my book. It got to bestseller, and I got into this show and got on the radio and all these other things, and it was great, and it really helped me, and I started to slowly get out of that and back
Right.
into what a normal place for me is.
Mm.
And so that is something that's really important, and I think comedy also helped us a lot. My family and I, my daughter moved back home with me when this all happened, because she was
Mhm.
best friends with her brother. They're close in age.
Mhm.
And it really, it's just little things that you can laugh about. And now we laugh even harder about all the silly, crazy things we ended up doing during the pandemic to like keep our sanity,
Yeah.
so to speak. You know, it was just crazy things.
Right.
And that we had to do, because we're not homebodies. But now,
Right.
how did that affect you as far as you like being home? Did that?
Uh, so first off, it was tough for me because my comedy, I was really ramping up right when it hit. And
Mm-hmm.
so comedy's been kind of a hobby for me. I've got a real job and I've got the podcast, but comedy has always been more of just, I do it when I feel like it. And at the end of 2019, I decided, okay, let's do this. Let's really get into it and be the best comic I could be. I was going, further distances. I was going between an hour and a half and 3 hours away to do sets, and was really getting to the point where I felt like I was doing pretty good. And
Mm-hmm.
then the rug got pulled out from under me. So that was not very good for me. However, being stuck inside wasn't
Yeah.
the worst thing. you know,
Nice.
I'm kind of an introvert, but the problem with that was my wife is more like you. She needs
Mm-hmm.
to be around people,
Right.
and she cannot sit there and like binge Netflix for 6 hours like I can.
Mm-mm.
So I had to be cognizant of that, and anytime we could get out, even if we were just going for a drive, or if it was nice, we got kayaks this year, and we'd
Nice.
go out and kayaking or hiking or something like that. So we had to make sure that type of stuff happened. The other thing that was a bit of a problem for me is I wrote a lot even when
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't performing, and when the pandemic hit, I didn't really have much life experience going on. We were kind of just in the house, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really have anything to write about. And that bothered me because I'm not like a current events type guy. So I can't write about, the coronavirus or
Yeah.
whatever happened here or there. I write about my own life and my family and stuff like that. So
Mm.
there really wasn't a whole lot to work on. And it really, for a few months, I didn't do anything. I did some Zoom comedy of my old bits and worked them out a little bit and made some progress there. But as far as writing, not much. But the second half of the year, I decided, okay, I'm going to dust off my old notebook and take those bits out that I said I'd never do again and try to make them funny. So I at least got my brain muscles working. I don't know if I'm going to come up with anything that is usable, but I'm at least making sure that I make myself write a little bit every day.
Yes, I love that. And life really does give us some of the best material for comedy.
Yeah.
That's for sure. It is. And it's so helpful. I know for me, years ago, when I was this young 18-year-old girl, I got my first job programming at JPL NASA, which was like a big deal. And
Uh-huh.
I was not the best programmer. I just knocked on the door and asked for the job.
Uh-huh.
And I needed the money. They paid well. And that's what you do back then. And I got to do the safety training for the groups at the different departments there. And it
Uh-huh.
was funny because the reason they liked it was I kept everybody awake because I didn't pronounce the words right.
Yeah.
All the and we would and I had everybody laughing, so nobody fell asleep during the required. It's like a government mandated safety training from OSHA that you have to do in the departments. And so I got to do these safety trainings, and, I shared everything, and there was papers and everything was spelled out, but we would have fun and make jokes of it. So even in a business setting, that comedy, it kept people awake during a very boring meeting if it wasn't for that. And it was important stuff that people had to know. And I had fun with it. I loved it. And it was a lot better for me than sitting at a desk typing numbers. So
no doubt.
So that was something that was my first stab at comedy, I guess, and my only, but something that happens every day. And laughter, I find, it's healing. It's healing to us. It's healing to the world, and especially right now, things are so serious. Even some of the clients I work with, I had one beautiful couple, and they said, "My gosh, our kids are fighting because they're homeschooled now, and we brought our businesses home, and the kids are fighting all the time." And I said, "Tell me more." And I said, "Are you and your husband fighting all the time?" "Yes." And I said, "Well, when was the last time you and your family played or laughed or had fun?" Not since the pandemic had started, and it was like 3 months in, and they were still on lockdown. And I was like, "This is your assignment. This week, you need to go have fun, even if you miss a day of school." and and because everything was serious, we had to kind of catch up on work. Maybe half the income in the house went down or something, and the kids are now home, and we forgot how to have fun this year, and we need to bring that back in a big way.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
There's a real tangible tension that comes from the pandemic, and if you don't have a release, then it really bottles up and it harms you. And there's studies out that show that they say laughter is the best medicine, and really it is. If you take the time to laugh, you watch even a Netflix special, or you go out and see a stand-up comedian live, you watch one of these virtual comedy shows, it helps. It helps both your mental state, and if you're sick, it makes you feel better.
Yes, and there's some people that have even kind of said they kind of healed through laughter. I mean, that was like their main medicine, was just to watch funny movies and comedy all day, and somehow they ended up going home and getting back on track with their life instead of getting sicker and sicker. And so it's kind of interesting. There's so many studies about that. I'd love for you to share maybe some tips about comedy that you share on your show to the audience, for those listening in who want to bring it to maybe their own comedy shows or just to their business, to bring some levity to this year.
Right. And I'll take my cue. It's funny about laughter being the best medicine. Behind me is a book by my mentor, Tom Dreesen, who was, he opened for Frank Sinatra for 14 years. And I think he's 81 right now. He was the first guest on my podcast, and he's one of the big proponents of laughter being the best medicine. But the one thing that he told me is that the audience has no expectations of you when you walk on the stage. So all the nervousness that you've bottled up inside, which could actually harm the way you put out your comedy, doesn't do you any good. So if you go out there knowing that they want to be entertained, they want you to be funny. They don't want you to fail. Right. And if you go out there with the mindset that, hey, they want me to be funny, they need to laugh, I got to bring it, then a lot of the nervousness goes away, and you remember your entire set, and you do great. So that's one big thing. A few other things that I have learned from the people I've talked to that have a lot more experience than me is that you should never take advice from other comedians. and the funny thing is, a funny story that I have is, we all know Jeff Foxworthy's "You Might Be a Redneck If." So before he started doing that, he actually bounced it off a friend of mine. This is back in the early 80s, and I think they were either in Chicago or Wisconsin. And he said, "Hey, what do you think about this thing? I'm thinking about doing You Might Be a Redneck If." And his buddy, who is my buddy, said, "That's never going to work. Don't do it." And that turned out to be his biggest thing. I mean, it put him on the Redneck Comedy Tour. It made him one of the biggest and highest paid comedians in the world. So comedians will give you notes. They'll say, maybe you should try this, maybe you should try that. For instance, I'm a clean comic. I work completely clean, and a lot of my peers have said, you can insert some words here. And you know what? In real life, I cuss like a sailor, but on stage, I've decided that it works for me to be clean. And it's a little bit more difficult. You have to use more words, and you don't get any shock value at all because you're working completely clean. But for me, I look like either your pharmacist or a high school history teacher, so I should work clean. And
Nice.
so that's a couple things that I think are important. And if you are thinking about doing stand-up comedy, a lot of people are afraid to do that first step to go to like an open mic and go up and do it. The first thing that you should know is everybody sings at an open mic, because they're either established comedians doing new material that they've never said out loud before, or they're brand new comedians just like you that have never been in front of an audience before, and nobody's going to judge you. So when you go up and do that 5 minutes, you are either going to be exhilarated and say, hey, I want to do this again, or say, I may never do this again. I would talk to one comic that did it, I think when he was 20, and he walked away from it for 5 years. Because he didn't like what he said, and he went on to be a very good comic. So it's funny. If you ever want to try it, it's like people say it's the hardest art in the world that you can do, because it's just you and the microphone and an audience, and you should absolutely just do it one time if you have any inkling to do it at all.
Well, I am definitely going to try it once, because I tell you the truth, I make myself laugh alone sometimes.
Yeah.
Just some stupid thing happens at home, and I'm like, I'm laughing all by myself. It's great.
Yeah.
But it makes all the difference in how my day goes on.
Right.
And how, sometimes we take life so seriously.
Right.
And it just makes all the difference. It lightens it up. It doesn't change anything, but it makes your day better. And I mean, I've had magical trips. I went to London, and I had 2 friends that I knew there. They met me there after I was on a speaking tour. And after working like a 10-hour day, they said, we're going to take you to this comedy club. I was out until, I think it was maybe 1 or 2 a.m. London time. And then I had to be on a plane at 6 a.m. back to the States. And so I had 0 sleep. They helped me I had to take this, they have like this train thing. They take the, I forget what it's called, but the tube. And so, so they like carried my luggage on the tube to get me to the airport on time, because they had kept me out all night with this. And we had a blast. And it's like the best memory I have of that was the comedy club, and we had front and center seats and had a blast. And so that was my favorite part of the entire trip. And something we do back in California, in Los Angeles, Laugh Factory, when it was opened. I don't know that it's opened yet again, but we would go there quite often with groups and enjoy that. So
and that's one thing. I see a lot of comedians myself. I go to see shows, and I've seen some of the big ones, and I see just some good working comedians, and I forget a lot of stuff. I'm a forgetful guy, but I never forget those nights, and I never forget some of the jokes that they say, and that stuff really sticks with you. And it's after you go see somebody that is a good comedian that makes you laugh for a good hour, you just feel better. Your whole outlook looks better, and everything that was weighing on you just goes away.
Now, when you write comedy and you're getting it from your personal life, everybody has their own way of writing their jokes. So I think that what I've noticed is that some people, they're trying really hard to come up with something, and that's when it's not as funny as when it's more of a natural, like, this happened.
Mhm.
Do you have any suggestions for the audience on that, on
Well,
natural comedy?
yeah, first, I think almost everybody, if you get into doing stand up seriously, you are going to do that. You're going to do some of that forced stuff that
Mm-hmm.
people can see as forced because you're just trying to write the best stuff you can. And it's amazing how many words it takes to make 5 minutes. It's a lot of words. And so you're just trying to put all that together. And I'm guilty of it. And I think every new comic, when an established comic, when they go back and look at their former self, everybody I've talked to, they say, well, I'm a little bit like that, or I'm nothing like that, but I'm so much better than I was then. You have
Mm-hmm.
to go through that period of just getting used to the stage and saying words. But when you're writing, it's funny for me, and I don't know if this is for everybody, stuff comes to me at really weird and inopportune times. So, like when I'm driving, something will come into my head.
Mm-hmm.
And then right before I go to bed, something will come into my head. When I'm cooking, something, and I don't have a notebook by me. I don't have anything. Fortunately, I have my phone. I'll do the voice recorder and I'll say it and put it in there. Those things that come to you are usually the things that are gold because it came to you when you weren't really consciously trying to write. Then what you do with those things, because it's a premise, like one of my jokes that's almost always in my act is I had a cashier tell me that I look like an older Harrison Ford. And obviously he's 21 years older than me, so I've made several jokes about that. But it's a real life thing that happened, and when I say it, I embellish a little bit. It was basically her telling me, "Hey, you look like an older Harrison Ford," and me just going thanks and walking away. And I put all different kinds of things into it, like maybe I should get Botox or whatever. And so I make a little bit of a bit out of it. But other things that come into your head that you think that are funny, what you do is you write that premise out and then you write everything you can about that premise. Don't
Mm.
worry about being short. Don't worry about it being funny. Don't worry about it being a joke. You write everything you can about that premise, and then you start looking at the parts. Okay, I don't need this part. I don't need this part. This isn't funny. You go from the setup to the punchline to maybe a couple tags afterwards, and then you end up with a joke. So that's what I recommend. Always have something by you that when something comes in your head, hey, this is funny, and then write it all out. Go long form when you write it out. Put everything you can because you might miss something if you don't, and then start. You end up with a punchline. Start taking out everything between the premise and the punchline that you don't need, and then you have yourself a joke.
Nice,
And then
nice.
do it 50 times.
Right.
And after you do it 50 times, you'll have changed it probably 50 times.
Mm. Yes. Now, did you naturally tell jokes as a child or young adult, or how did that show up in your life at
Yeah,
first?
so it originally showed up. I was a pretty serious kid up until about the time I was, I think, 11 or 12. And the funny thing is, it's that old Tom Dreesen showed up on the Mike Douglas show, and he was doing jokes, and I fell in love with it. I was like, stand-up comedy here. That's really the first stand-up comedy that I experienced. And I'm like, this is the best thing in the world. And I loved him so much that I would get the TV guide. We didn't have the internet, you know.
Yeah.
I got the TV guide and I'd look at where he was going to be because he did Dinah Shore, he did Mike Douglas, he did Merv, he did
Hmm.
Carson. And then when Letterman started, he's one of Dave Letterman's best friends. He was on Letterman, I think, 35 times. So I was absolutely in love with him. And from that, I started thinking maybe I can do this. But the other thing is I was super awkward. I was 6'5" by the time I was 12, 13, and I weighed 165 pounds until the time I was like 22. So I basically, if I stood sideways, you couldn't see me. I was invisible. And I didn't really fit in. I was terrible at sports. I'm kind of an outlier. I don't get into things that other people get into. Like for instance, Star Wars came out during that
Mm.
time. I didn't like it. I never watched another one, and I just didn't really fit in. So I started doing the class clown thing. And unfortunately, the way I did class clown was to question authority. Instead of just being funny with the kids in school, I was always making the teachers mad at me and getting kicked out of class. so so I started doing that, and I kind of liked it. And the funny thing is I've always been kind of a jokey type of guy. I can be super silly, or I can be a little bit more dry humor. I've
Mm-hmm.
always been like that. And I've been at the same place, working at the same place for 16 years. And it was about 5 years ago, one of my coworkers came up to me. I always say his name. It's Michael Dunlap, because I want everybody to know he's the one that got me into comedy.
Mm.
He said, we do this annual party every year, and we want you to do stand-up comedy for it, because we've had a magician 3 years in a row, and we're tired of the magician. And my answer to him was, no, I'm not a stand-up comic. And I went home, and I came back, and he asked me again, and he asked me again. He asked me about 4 times, and I finally came home and told my wife. I said, Lisa, Michael is bugging me to do stand-up comedy for the company party. And she said, well, you want to do it, so just do it. So I went back and said I'd do it. And that was the start of what I'm doing now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. That's great. So for those listening in, even if you have young children or young adults that start to maybe act up and tell jokes in class, this may be the secret to get them into listening to some podcasts about comedy and using it as a productive thing in life.
Right.
Because it tends to be that we don't all end up with a desk job, for sure.
Mhm.
And I know I have 6 kids. They're all grown now. I adopted 3. They're all mine. But,
Uh-huh.
that's something that they're all different, and they have different talents, and those talents showed up pretty young.
Mhm. Yeah.
And now that's what they do for a living.
Yeah.
So so they show, these talents show up, or it may be this year is the year that you are listening in and you finally have time, maybe due to shifts in the economy with our universal pause / pandemic, that
Yeah.
you get to go and play with something that's always been a passion, maybe a
Yeah.
secret passion like comedy.
Mhm.
And so this is a great way to get started. So if somebody's listening in, Scott, and they want to get started, but they haven't done anything, what are the first steps to take?
I got books. So
Okay.
I got Born Standing Up by Steve Martin. I got the Comedy Bible. I got Tom's book back there. How many other books? I got so many other books. There's one by Greg Dean that I got. That's a comedy writing workbook. I took some classes. I watch comedians very closely. There's a lot of things you can do to prep. Nothing is the same as doing it, though. So
Mm.
you have to actually get up a couple times to understand what it's all about. But it's funny you talk about people finding their way young. And the funny thing is both my kids, like yours, found out what they wanted to do fairly young, and they're doing it now, and they're
Mhm.
happy. I I've always been okay, as far as
Yeah.
work goes. I like what I do. I absolutely love the company I work for now. I've had some companies I didn't like, and I jumped around for a while.
Mhm.
But there was always something there. I got to try something. I got to do this, and the comedy thing was it. And it's funny how many people that I run into now that have started comedy in their 50s like me. And I know one guy that started in his 70s. So it's never too late. It's never
Mhm.
too early, but it's also never too late to start, and you might find out that you're good at it.
Yes, and at least you're having fun
Yes.
doing what you like, even if you make a mistake. So that's something like you brought up earlier. If you get up and try some comedy on a stage, or in front of your
Mm-hmm.
friends are maybe a safe way to start.
Uh-huh.
Then you can be okay with making those mistakes. I know that public speaking is something I started when I was 10.
Mm.
and, and I was doing all these speeches, and I could speak in front of people all day and night is not a problem. I disappeared. Oh, here I am back.
There
And
you go.
so, it's funny how we I know. And so it's funny how we know we're already doing our talents, and to be able to make money at that. Now, how do
Mm.
people monetize with comedy? How does that work? Does that happen? I know that it's like a small group that actually can make a full-time living
Right.
in that realm. So, what are
Yeah,
suggestions for that?
there's really a lot of stages. First you don't make any money at all, and
Mhm.
you're basically doing open mics. You may get uh, a guest spot at a comedy club that doesn't pay. They may give you a drink ticket or two, and that's really all you get. And then what most of the people, and it's funny, almost everybody I've talked to on my podcast, when they got to a point where they felt like they were good enough to do like a good 20 minutes or a half hour, they weren't getting hired to do that because nobody knew them. They
Mm.
started making their own shows. So they'd make their own showcase and put it in a like a local bar or something like that, or a local restaurant, and get their other buddies together who are at the same spot, and they'd start doing their showcase stuff, which gives them practice, gets them paid
Mhm.
a little bit. You charge $5 at the door and split it equally, and you get a little bit of money for doing comedy. And then you just keep honing your craft, start sending your videos, used to be tapes, into comedy clubs, try to get in, start talking to the hosts, the people that book the
Mhm.
club. You're going to get a lot of no's. It's just like sales. That's my
Right.
other job, is sales. It's just like sales. No, 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 no. You got to get 100 of them to get a yes. And
Yeah.
you just got to keep putting yourself out there. And finally, it's going to click, and you're going to work with somebody that likes you, a headliner that might like you, and they'll say, I'm going to recommend you to this club, and this
Mhm.
club. And it's amazing what happens when you keep working at it. Now,
Right.
the problem with that is most of the comics that I have talked to, a minimum of 5 years before you start making enough money to actually even cover your travel. So
Mhm.
it's a long game, and
Yes.
it's a game that you really got to be committed to if you want to make it your career. So, and it's weird how comedy goes. It used to be LA and New York were the places where you got the most money to be a comic.
Mhm.
And now the funny thing is, it's the Midwest. The Midwest pays a lot more for comics than any of the coasts, because it takes a lot to get a comic there. So it's really funny how things change. And it's, if you want to make a living at it versus making a hobby, and I still consider, even though I've done my own shows, I've been paid and all that, I still consider it a hobby, because
Right.
I can't even pay the electric bill with what I've made in a month doing stand up. But if you really want to make it, you have to know that you're going to have to keep a full-time job. You're not going to get a
Mhm.
lot of sleep. You're going to be doing open mics 4 or 5 nights a week. You're going to be doing those showcases. It's a lot of work.
Yes. So it's got to be a passion. It's got to
Yes.
be
Yeah.
something you love. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that makes all the difference. And it's even Gary Vee, who's really famous for branding and for
Mhm.
businesses. It's 3 to 5 years is pretty standard to actually get your brand out there and have your
Yeah.
messaging and be found and this and that. And so that's really what it takes, is commitment. And I mean, I think about Arnold Schwarzenegger as an actor. How did
Mhm.
he fueled his acting career? Uh, what did he fuel it with? He fueled it with real estate sales and real
Yeah.
estate investments. And because it takes time to, even in that field, and I guess comedy is kind of similar to that. It's kind of in that professional acting and
Mhm.
that realm. And so it does take another business to fuel your dreams many times. So if you're
Right.
listening in right now and you have another business that fuels your dreams, you can still have fun at that business and
Mhm.
and and be successful, but go and have time committed every week, every month, to your passion project, that your hobby that becomes maybe a full-time career at some point in your life. As long as you don't put it down, it's still out there. And as long as you
Right.
keep learning, reading books, listening to incredible podcasts. So I'd love to hear about your podcast and how people can connect and listen in on the show.
Right. So the podcast came about obviously as I had been doing comedy for a couple years, and it was probably the best planned out thing I've ever done in my life. I'm very impetuous. I just jump into things, and this is something that I took about 6 months to prepare and listen to other people's podcasts and find out what I liked, what I didn't like, and what I wanted to do in mine. And behind the bits is what I like to put. I like to call it a toolkit for any aspiring comedian or a professional comedian to learn from the people who did it before them and who are making a living at it. So what I did is I decided, first of all, there's not going to be any small talk. There's no, hey, how you doing? How's the weather out there? That type of stuff. It's like, let's get into it. Let's talk about comedy. How do you write? How do you get paid? What's the best advice you had? So I kind of pepper my guests with questions, and they give a lot of good information. And I don't just interview comics. So I've interviewed a professional speaking coach. I've interviewed a what do they call it? A life coach. I've interviewed a life coach because a lot of people don't know how to take that next step once they've been doing open mics for a while to get paid and get in the showcase. So I've done those types of interviews, and everything that I learn from it becomes something that everybody can listen to and learn from it as well. And what I really like is the fact that I've got established comedians like friends of Tom Dreesen, who have been on the show, who listen to the show religiously because they want to, first of all, hear what their buddies are doing. Because I talk to a lot of the greats that have been around for 30, 40, 50 years, but I also talk to people who've been around for 10 years that are just on that cusp of getting like that Netflix special or something like that. And they want to learn from the new guys. And comedy nerds, I didn't know how many people were nerdy about comedy that say, hey, I just want to know what goes on behind the scenes. They don't have any desire to do it, but they want to listen to what is actually going on. So I feel like I'm kind of a cross between like Larry King and Dick Cavett. And I really just pull as much information as I can out of those comics. And boy, there's a lot of great nuggets there.
Nice. I love that. And so if I wanted to tune in or listen into Behind the Bits, where do I go for that?
So any podcast app, it's super simple. Just type in Behind the Bits and it'll come up. My logo's blue. It's got the comedy and tragedy mask on it and a microphone. So it's really easy to find that way. I also have a website. It's called thebtbpc.com, and you can listen to the episodes right there. I write a blog. There's all kinds of information on that website as well. But if you're like me and you just want to listen to the podcast, I pull it up on whatever podcast app I'm using and type it in and just listen.
Outstanding.
I have to let you know something. Just between you and me. This book is not one size fits all, just like a pair of boots or a bra. So the formula is designed to help you through any situation.
If you're just tuning in, this is the Sheila Mack Show, and I am your host, Sheila Mack. And today we have special guest, Scott Curtis. Scott is the producer of Behind the Bits, a podcast and serious talk about stand-up comedy. Every week, Scott talks about serious comedians and their craft, where they are inspired by Dave Chappelle and George Carlin, Paula Poundstone, and many more. How do they write their comedy sets? Which jokes work and which ones failed? How do you find your comedy voice? And Then they hit on topics every week so that you and I can learn from the professional comedians who have blazed the trail for us. All right. So, Scott, welcome to the show. I'd love for you to share more about your podcast.
Right. Thank you. So Behind the Bits is a passion project for me because I started comedy later in life. I want to learn as much as I can so that I can get as good as I can quickly because I don't have that many years left. If you start when you're 20, you got a lot more years. I started when I was 52. But the podcast is basically me absorbing as much information from established comedians about how they write, how they book shows, how they get paid, how they perform on stage, what has changed from year 1 to year 5, good advice, bad advice. It's everything that a comedian needs to know about stand-up comedy coming from the pros who get paid to do it.
All right. And where can people find your podcast or tune into your website?
Right. So the podcast is very easy to find. It's just type in Behind the Bits into any podcast app and it'll come up. Or you can go to my website. It's called thebtbpc.com.
All right. Thank you again. And we will be back after these messages. Welcome to Dear Sheila, answering real questions with real solutions to help reboot your life. I have COVID credit. How do I rebuild my credit and get out of debt? Dear Sheila, I have been hit hard this year with medical expenses and my hours got cut due to the COVID pandemic. I'm having lots of trouble figuring out how to continue to pay all my creditors while maintaining enough income to get by. Last year, I also went through a very costly divorce and now this. So my credit and debt load were already maxed out. And that was when I was working full time. Now my hours have reduced to half. My question is, how do I avoid more credit issues, pay off my debt, and survive right now? Or should I just file for bankruptcy? Signed, COVID Credit Sick. Dear COVID Credit Sick, this is definitely the year for rebooting and reinventing your business and financial life. Many people are also in your shoes, and the good news is that most companies and creditors are more than willing to work with you and renegotiate your debt repayment terms. Let's run this situation through the Boots formula. Throughout life, one can find themselves facing difficult situations that often catch them by surprise. Over the years, I saw the pattern in all the times I've had to reboot and in how I've helped my friends and clients get through a hard time and quickly back into action. Ultimately, I came up with the Boots formula. The B in Boots is for being. It is about who you are being and all you are doing and who you need to be during this situation. You are going to have to be really honest about your current debt and how much money you must reserve for daily needs and a small emergency stash. Who must you be in order to face those bill collectors? And who are you going to be in order to show up differently going forward? This is going to make a huge difference. The first O in the Boots formula is for orientation. In order to get the outcomes you desire, you must be brutally honest here. What are you currently living on? What are your expenses, your debts, and how much do you need to put aside for other situations? What outcomes do you want for your finances? And what do you do for your current employer that you could possibly do as an independent contractor at this time? Do you want to reestablish credit fast and one day qualify for a new home or car? The outcome is to find happiness now while you continue to rebuild your credit and get out of debt. The next O in the Boots formula is for order of operations. Now that you know who you need to be and your orientation, you can decide in which order you must do things to set up a realistic budget based on your current income, stop all non-essential subscriptions and services, call creditors, renegotiate terms, see if you can outsource your skills for a new part-time job, decide what you can do to earn these extra income hours. See, in the long run, the order in which you do these things is really going to drive your results. The Tea in the Boots formula is for thinking. This is where your mindset comes in. Stop waiting to be happy when all the bills are paid off. Choose to live in a grateful and happy state now. Be proud of yourself for calling your creditors and renegotiating your terms. Somehow, when you shift your thinking and focus on what you are grateful for and what you decide to move toward, the other pieces of life fall into place. The S in the Boots formula is for stepping up. This is the part that puts all the other pieces you have planned into place and gets you and your credit life back into action. I'd love for you to grab a copy of my new best-selling book, Bootstraps and Bra Straps, the formula to go from rock bottom back into action in any situation. It is now available on Audible as well as on Amazon and Kindle and at www.sheilamac.com.